Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you. And this week we're talking about Goodbye Columbus from 1969, a movie that I think probably only got made because of the success of The Graduate 2 years before it in 1967. And you can perhaps, if we were comparing those two, see some similarities there, right down to the soundtrack, right? They couldn't go back to Simon and Garfunkel to do it. So they went to another pop group, The Association, perhaps not quite so successfully as Paul Simon did for The Graduate, but there is a song by The Association called "Goodbye Columbus," just as there was a song about Mrs. Robinson in The Graduate, and The Association had some very big hits, actually. So. They were a pretty well-known band as well as Simon and Garfunkel. So one other thing to think about this movie, made in 1969 from a book, Philip Roth's first book, Goodbye Columbus. Goodbye Columbus was the novella in that. And I didn't actually check to see whether members of the association were Jewish. I wouldn't be surprised, but they're probably best known for songs like Windy and Cherish, I think are some of their big hits, as I recall. What was I saying? So this book by Philip Roth came out in 1959. So it was a decade between the time the book was published and the movie was created. I would say that the movie doesn't make clear exactly when it takes place, right? You know, I think it's meant to be contemporary to the times of the late 60s, but it's not perfectly clear. And it's just worth thinking about as we go through our discussion of it. So the movie was said from this book by Philip Roth. It was his first book. He won the National Book Award for Goodbye Columbus. He won it again decades later for a book called Sabbath's Theater. Philip Roth was born in 1933 in Newark. He just died a few years ago in 2018. He wrote a lot of books. Several of them have now been adapted to the movies. Some of you may have seen the TV series based on one of his books that was around a couple of years ago, The Plot Against America, which was very timely when it was written and continued to be timely when it was adapted for the screen in 2018, I believe. He also won the Pulitzer Prize for his book, American Pastoral, which has also been made into a movie, along with several others over the years. I may have mentioned the last time we talked about Philip Roth, which was when we were watching the movie The Human Stain in our series a year or so ago, that I have a sort of a personal connection here. Philip Roth was born in Newark. He was the son of Bess and Herman Roth. And when I was a student rabbi, still in rabbinic school in New York, I was assigned to Temple Beth El in Newark, New Jersey, actually in Elizabeth, New Jersey at that point, to be the student rabbi. And the first night I was there, a fellow came up to me and we got to talking, and his name was Herman Roth. And he told me he had two sons, and one of them was a writer. And I said, has he written anything I would have heard of? They said, well, Goodbye Columbus. And I said, oh, I've heard of that guy. So I actually have several books by Philip Roth, signed by Herman Roth in my life. So Herman and I got to be friendly. And actually, when Philip Roth wrote a book about his father, a memoir called Patrimony, he mentions the young rabbinic student who visited his father in the hospital. Well, that would be me. And then later on, he mentions, as if there were the same rabbinic student, the one who officiated at his father's funeral, but that was my successor the next year because I had been ordained by that point. So so the student rabbi who came after me actually officiated at the funeral. But so we're sort of a composite character, I guess, in the Philip Roth book, So, and the other thing I just mentioned is though the women of this congregation wanted to make it very clear to me that Bess Roth, who was already deceased by the time I got there, was nothing like the mothers that appeared in Philip Roth books. They wanted to make that very clear. Now, I don't know that Philip Roth ever made that clear, where he got this stories of the Jewish mother that are particularly bad in a book like Portnoy's Complaint, but you see elements of it certainly in this movie as well. But from eyewitness accounts, he was not writing about his own mother. Okay, so.
Oh, good. Sandy has her hand up.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment that I loved Patrimony. I just read it about 2 years ago, and I would advise anyone that wants a good book to try it. It's very different, Philip Roth, and it's not long. It's really a good read. Yeah,
it really is. Philip Roth for me as a writer is sort of a mixed bag. I mean, I find some of his books impossible to put down and others really hard to read. So, his book, The Great American Novel, is as far as I can tell, unreadable, but there are some others, but particularly later in his career, I think he wrote some incredibly well-written, easy to read, pleasurable books. So, and I'm very fond actually of Goodbye Columbus, the book, and some of the stories in there. Particularly there's one called The Conversion of the Jews that is one that I've read over and over the years. So so no one's ever made that into a movie. So going back to, let's talk about the director a little bit and the writer of the movie. Philip Roth didn't write the screenplay. A guy named Arnold Schulman wrote the screenplay. He was born in 1925 in Philadelphia. He actually was nominated for the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay for this. Excuse me. He also wrote, he was also nominated for an Oscar for, I think, his first screenplay for the movies, which was called Love with the Proper Stranger in 1964. So he was certainly from a Jewish family. He wrote a lot in the early days of live TV, those 90-minute teleplays that really are a part of the birth of television. He was very involved in many of those in the years. As late as 1994, he was still writing. He got an Emmy nomination for a movie about the AIDS epidemic called And the Band Played On. So in between, he wrote some other interesting screenplays. He wrote the screenplay for The Night They Raided Minsky's in 1968. He wrote the screenplay for the Broadway show, A Chorus Line, when it was made into a movie in 1985. He worked with Francis Ford Coppola on a movie called Tucker, A Man and His Dream in 1988, which is an interesting film if you ever get a chance to see it.
He is still alive. He's 97.
Yeah. So no stranger to the Jewish community. And remember those early days of television when he was writing, he would certainly have been no stranger to New York, and born, I think, in Philadelphia, but certainly spent a lot of time in New York over the years. So the director is a guy named Larry Pierce, who is the son of Jan Pierce. So Jan Pierce, the operatic tenor and cantor, who has a small part in this movie, along with his brother. He plays the one of the two brothers who are in the carpet business. who go pacing back and forth in the wedding hall,
yeah.
right? Counting their way across to see how many square feet the banquet hall is, how much carpet it would actually take, right? So, interestingly, he did not cast him as the rabbi or chazan who does the wedding, right? So I'm not sure why not, really, except that maybe he wanted him in this other role. Couldn't have him for both, but I don't know whether to call him an actor or not. The cantor who appears as the cantor in the wedding scene is a cantor. His name is David Benedict, and I think in the credits they call him the rabbi, but
They
he
do.
but he was actually a cantor. He did, I'm told, almost 8,000 weddings in his career, not including this one in Goodbye Columbus, and one more that he did on television, actually, in the TV series The Nanny with Fran Drescher, when Fran Drescher actually marries the person she's she's nannying for a single father, right? So when she marries the single father, this same guy, David Benedict, who apparently did Fran Drescher's sister's wedding in real life, does it on television in when that comes up. So Larry Pierce, the director, was born in the Bronx in 1930, the son of Jan Pierce, so certainly grew up in the Jewish community. He made several movies over the years. He actually has lots of credits in television series in the 1960s. A lot of actually did a surprising amount, I would say, of like violent TV westerns, things like Branded and Wild Wild West. Later on, well, in the 60s, he also directed some episodes of the original Batman TV series. And a bit later on, he did some episodes of the series Touched by an Angel. He made some other movies in Hollywood, not just Goodbye Columbus, although I think this is far and away his most successful movie. This movie was a big hit when it came out. In 1964, he made his first movie. It was called One Potato, Two Potato. It was actually about interracial marriage. Pretty early on, right? I mean, that's 3 years before Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, right? So it was pretty controversial at the time. After this movie, he made a movie called A Separate Piece, based on the book by John Knowles. He made a movie called Ash Wednesday, which had Elizabeth Taylor in it. He made the adaptation of Sylvia Plath's book, The Bell Jar, in 1979. So he's I don't know that he's on anybody's list as a great Hollywood director, but a very serviceable director. And I think there's a lot of style in his direction. I mean, he's not just pointing the camera and shooting. I mean, we can talk about some of that as we talk about the movie itself, but he does a lot of interesting things that call attention to themselves as a director that are worth thinking about. So, and then the producer of this movie is Stanley R. Jaffe, who was born in 1940. This was his first movie as a producer. He was from New Rochelle, New York, and so the suburban Jewish community was his bailiwick. So we've seen one other movie in our series that was produced by him, School Ties, which came out in 1992. It's about, if you remember, anti-Semitism in a boarding school, right? He won an Oscar because he was the producer of Kramer versus Kramer, which won Best Picture. And he was nominated a second time for Best Picture for his movie Fatal Attraction. So, these none of these players are really small timers when you think about it. So this is an A-list movie, Goodbye Columbus. It was intended to be successful, and it was successful, right? And as I said, I think probably got green-lit because of the success of The Graduate. And so going on from there, it was pretty clear that this would be, a popular movie like The Graduate was. So we can talk about the cast a bit. In particular, we want to mention Richard Benjamin, who plays Neil Klugman, and born in 1938 in New York City. He's been married to Paula Prentice since I think the late 1950s. And they starred in a TV series together, He and She, in the 1960s, which among other things was about an interfaith marriage, which in some ways was the life that they lived themselves. So around the time of this movie, he was making some other movies. He actually got his start more on Broadway than in acting in the movies. He was in, I think this was one of Neil Simon's first plays, The Star-Spangled Girl on Broadway. And but in the movies, this was his first big role, and then went on to star in Diary of a Mad Housewife in 1970, Marriage of a Young Stockbroker in 1971, Portnoy's Complaint in 72. One critic of the time called him an archetype of the East Coast Jewish intellectual agony, right? So certainly a character that he played over and over. A lot of things, though. He does do some very nice work in Mike Nichols' movie version of Catch-22. I have a couple of favorites. He's in the movie version of Westworld from 1973. He's in Love at First Bite, a vampire comedy from 1979, which is quite clever. And then we've seen his work as a director. We watched My Favorite Year, about the early days of live television, if you remember, and he directed that. So he also directed Neil Simon's version of the same time period, really of the same show, called Laughter on the 23rd Floor. And he directed a couple other movies of note, City Heat, which is mostly known because it featured Clint Eastwood and Burt Reynolds in a movie together for the only time when they were the biggest box office stars. And he made a movie that I like very much called Running with the Moon as well. So multi-talented guy, and does a very serviceable job as an actor in this film, I think. Ali MacGraw won awards, I think, a Golden Globe for Best Newcomer as a result of this movie. She was born in 1939, not Jewish, although at least one article I read said she had a Jewish grandparent. But she studied art history at Wellesley, and in 1969, she was really introduced in this movie. The next year, she made Love Story, for which she got an Oscar nomination. And then in a few more movies after that, The Getaway, directed by Sam Peckinpah, and a few others. But really don't see her in that many movies over the years. So I want to mention Jack Klugman, of course. Born in 1922 in Philadelphia, died in 2012. I think it's just a coincidence. I didn't go back and look at Goodbye Columbus, the book, but that the character Neil Klugman is Richard Benjamin's character, and the actor Jack Klugman is in the movie. Of course, he's very well known for his time on television. The TV series of The Odd Couple started the next year, 1970. He'd had a long history of being in movies. I mean, you can go back to like 1957. He's one of the jurors in 12 Angry Men. Right? So he'd been around Hollywood for a long time. He did a lot of live TV, a lot of those things in the 50s and 60s. And he was in Days of Wine and Roses in 1962. I can't get a real handle on how whether anyone considered him a star in 1969. He gets pretty good billing in this movie, you know, but I think it's really, he becomes a household name and really well known in the next year when he stars with Tony Randall in The Odd Couple. So, and of course, then Quincy in 1976, which I think actually lasts on TV even longer than The Odd Couple did. So, most of the other actors in this movie you've probably not seen again. You know, Nan Martin, who plays his wife, who, by the way, in the credits, I think is called Mrs. Ben Patinkin, you know, doesn't have a first name. You know, lots of TV credits. She's been on every TV series, you know, and so you may recognize her face from this or that or the other thing, but of course never really became a star. Born in 1927, she died in 2010. She was actually born here in Illinois. She was born in Decatur, so just nice to know. The young man who plays the brother, Ron, this is really his main credit in Hollywood. I think he's pretty funny in this movie. It's not that Mike Myers.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking.
Yeah. So you might, if you try Michael Myers, you might.
Okay. There he is.
Yeah. But you can see, I mean, there's no other credits there. They're just scenes of him. He actually went on to become a doctor. He worked in the field of fields of rehab in particular. So he, you know, for addicts. So he passed away actually in 2009, I think. But as far as I can tell, this is really his only screen credit. So, so he shows some talent, I think, but you know, maybe he was just being himself. I don't really know. A couple other people you probably didn't notice. I was looking really hard trying to find them. I'm told that Susan Lucci and Bette Midler and Jacqueline Smith from Charlie's Angels are all in the wedding scene. But I don't know how many times you have to watch it to find them. Because if anyone caught that, please let me know. But so of course, really the movie's main characters, you know, the little girl, of course, has some lines. She went on to do a couple of other things over the years, never became a big star, of course. The younger sister in this movie, I think her name is Laurie Schell. And other than those, there's hardly any even speaking parts in the movie when you think about it, really. The little boy in the library is named Anthony McGowan. He, as far as I can tell, has never been in anything else besides Goodbye Columbus. And though that may be a small part, I think it's actually a pivotal role in this movie, and that I'll come back to that as we talk about it. So let's talk about the movie a little bit. You know, we're going to compare it next week to Down and Out in Beverly Hills, a movie by Paul Mazursky. But you may also see parallels to some of the other movies that we've seen. Bye Bye Braverman, for example, if you remember that film about the four guys trying to find their frenemy's funeral that we watched a while back, or The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, which I think covers some territory that's similar to this, so we can find some other comparisons. It's striking in and of itself when an A-list movie comes out that is really sort of solely about Jewish characters in a Jewish milieu. That doesn't happen all that often, and so it's worth talking about that it's simply that. As I said, I think a comparison to The Graduate is also apt. This main character, Neil, is a lot like Ben in The Graduate. It's some of the same things that afflict Ben in that movie afflict Neil here. He's apathetic and ambivalent and indecisive. He's trying to figure out who he is in the world. He may know some of the things he doesn't want, but he's unable to articulate what he does want, right? So I think in that sense that this is, the perhaps the time capsule that the movie is in, right? This is the story of the 1960s, right? Maybe from the late 50s, the 60s. Perhaps the truest line in the movie is when the father, Ben, says to him, when I was your age, I thought the same thing about the generation that came before me, right? So it'd be interesting to think about, so what does Neil become? At the end of the movie, he's nothing, right? He walks out of that hotel room out into the street, and that's the end. We don't know anything about what he becomes, but is it too much of a stretch of the imagination to imagine that eventually he becomes a lot like Ben or any of those people in that generation, right? We don't know, right? But there is a kind of a, can I say, like I said, I think it's one of the truest lines in the movie is that every generation rebels against the generation before and then finds out that they're a lot like them, right? So it's sort of an interesting thing to think about. By the meaning of the name Klugman, does anyone know that name? It actually means smart, a smart man, right? So I don't know that he lives up to the name, right, in the movie. So he's a walking mass of contradictions, So like I say, he knows a couple of things he doesn't want. I mean, he doesn't want to be in real estate. He doesn't want, what was the other job he says he did for a while? I don't recall at the moment.
Shoe salesman.
Shoe salesman, that's it. Thank you. Right. So, here plumbing supplies takes the place of plastics in the movie The Graduate, right? This is what you can have if you go forward, right? But so I find myself thinking about who is the hero of this movie, and I would say it's definitely not Neil, and I don't think it's Brenda. I think it's probably Ben, right? Is the closest thing to a hero that we have in this movie. Is the closest thing to a person who says what he means, and I think it's really interesting. I see some hands up, so.
Yeah, Susan, go ahead. And then Alice.
Okay. Well, I read the book I'm old enough to have read it when it first came out.
Yeah.
And I saw the movie when it first came out. And of course, I remember liking it very much, but I didn't remember a lot of the details because it was a long time ago. So I watched it again just the other day. And I think there's a lot of really good things in the movie, but I also think that in the book as well as the movie, Philip Roth feeds on the stereotypes that others have of Jews.
Mhm.
And I find that very disturbing. I don't think he made Jews look very good in this movie. You had to dig really deep to see the good parts of their character, this loving father as Ben was. And the other thing that bothered me, I think it's pretty misogynistic.
Mhm.
When you talk about the end of it and Neil walking out on her, he walked out on her because she wouldn't bring her diaphragm to the hotel. And this diaphragm subject kept coming up whenever with their sexuality. Did he ever not think of a condom? Where was
no.
his responsibility? And it was all the responsibility was on the woman. And I found that very disturbing. And when he walked out, I mean, I understand that she was kind of a spoiled brat and irresponsible as well, but they both were.
Yeah.
I mean, they were equally irresponsible. So anyway, that's kind of what I have to say about it.
Here, Alice.
Oh, go ahead, Rabbi.
I was just gonna say, I tend to agree with most of that. And that's why I say, when I think about who's the hero here, it's not either one of them.
Right.
Whether it's misogynist, I mean, I think that may be stronger than I would go there. Certainly the debate when this book came out, when the movie came out, was this question of how does it make Jews look, right? Which is an interesting quandary that we as Jews have. On the one hand, I mean, real acceptance is being able to show things warts and all, right? To not have to, make every Jew in every movie the perfect Jew, like the one John Garfield plays in A Gentleman's Agreement, right? A decorated war hero, he's perfect, So can you make movies where these folks are not perfect? But does it have to truck in negative stereotypes? In some ways, this book and others like it created the stereotypes, right? I mean, I'm not sure that they existed before. The stereotype of the Jewish mother, Philip Roth is the one who turns it dark, right? From a more benevolent, maybe a little nosy, Mrs. Goldberg, from the Goldbergs into, a shrewish Jewish mother, right? It gets a lot darker. So, but in some ways, Philip Roth and Mordecai Rickler and a couple of these writers from that time period kind of create the stereotype. So, anyway, I probably left some things out there, but Alice, go ahead.
Yeah, well, this is in response to what you said, Rabbi, and also to what Susan said. In terms of the hero, I mean, I'm a child of the late 50s. I was in college in the early 60s, 62 to 6. I'm sorry, the late 60s, 66 to 70. I got myself mixed up. Anyways, I'm thinking, I don't know, does there have to be a hero? I don't know, a lot. I feel like a lot of what I experienced in the arts, there wasn't a hero. And I have to tell you, my husband and I both watched this movie together. I mean, I had seen it when it first came out, but we just watched it this week. And we had a lot of discussion of, was she using him or was he using her? And I think actually what we came up with is they kind of were both using each other.
Yeah.
I know, I think they just both wanted a summer fling that maybe got out of hand a little bit, but I really feel like they both used each other. So I'm not sure it was, Susan, I'm not sure it was misogynistic. I just feel like she was using him in a lot of respects and he was using her. Okay, in one other thing I just want to say about the Jewish stereotype. Well, I watched this movie, I think it was in 1969 when it came out or shortly after. And ever since then, the only thing that I remember from the movie. And the only thing I ever remember anybody talking about in the movie was the wedding scene.
Yeah.
But when you watch this movie, that is really a short part of the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought the movie was much more about the relationship between the two of them.
Mhm.
And yes, it was over the top, but this kind of goes to what you said, Rabbi. Are Jewish people the only people that are over the top? Oh, no. I mean, I can't give you an example in a movie or a book, but I know there are plenty. I mean, you could go back to The Great Gatsby with F. Scott Fitzgerald. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much in literature and in the movies where it's not just Jews over the top. My feeling about this is that non-Jews have taken this, oh, look what the Jews are like. I really feel like that. I really feel that non-Jews have taken this to be anti-Semitic. That's my, it was really a short part of the movie.
Right. And this, of course, is why we're in that quandary, right? I mean, it's, you know, what does it say to other people about Jews? You know, it's sort of like what jokes Jews can tell each other. You know, we're not the only ethnic community that has this problem, right? I mean, African Americans have this problem. You know, Hispanics have this. Everybody's got this problem. Can we, you know, what, you know, should we air our dirty laundry in public, right? And sometimes, you know, you have to say, okay, it's not, you know, this movie is just this movie. It's about these people, and they're, you know, and that's why I'd say, if you like you were saying, Alice, the wedding is a few minutes in this movie. Most of it is about these two people and their communication and miscommunication, right? Of which there's quite a bit, right? And you know, and so can't we just see it as a movie about these people, this family, right? And whenever we take it as it's about all the Jews, and whenever other people say, oh, that's what all Jews are like, right? That's when we get into, you know, a place that we just don't want to be in, right? I mean, this movie is about this family, right? You know, and yes, the wedding scene maybe is a little over the top. Frankly, I think I've seen a lot worse, you know, since, you know, when it comes to this stuff. I will say, I remember when my parents saw this movie, and the thing that scandalized them was sex before marriage.
Oh,
Right?
yes.
That was, you know, I don't remember them talking about the wedding scene, right? And when I talking about a movie being dated, right? I mean, you know, I can't imagine what my kids would think of this movie. You know, I can tell you, I sometimes talk with wedding couples here, and I can tell you that I have not been at a wedding where the couple was not living together since my wedding, right? That's the last time. And frankly, if I was not the new young rabbi in town, Celan and I probably would have lived together too. But all our friends did, you know, and all our parents were okay with it, right? By the 80s, yes, right? But in 1969, when my parents saw this movie, and they had a particular disdain for the shower scene, actually, but the whole thing was just absolutely scandalous to them. It had nothing to do with Jewish stereotypes. It had nothing to do with the wedding reception. The movie was daring in its time, but not for any of the things that we've talked about so far, right? You know,
Yeah, Elaine, and then Linda.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree with Susan 100%. I could not believe that all the birth control had to be on her. And this guy has, since he's much more concerned with pregnancy, has never thought of using a condom. And I just was so, I've seen this movie before, but it's been years and years. And I do think he's likely a kind of a self-loathing Jew, and I found it very offensive and very, very stereotypical. The only things that were really sweet to me is I had forgotten the word Satskala, and I remembered when I heard it that my dad called me that.
Yeah.
And my dad grew up and worked in a chicken market, and he always loved and was so impressed with the scene in the wedding where he chops the head off the chopped liver chicken.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm certainly not standing up for Neil Klugman in this movie. I don't think I I would go more with what Alice was saying about them using each other. But I was again maybe in its time frame. I mean, condoms made a big comeback with the AIDS epidemic. Right? There was a period of time when people thought, why would we use that? That's old. That's old-fashioned technology. The pill, that's the thing, right? I'm not defending him by any means, because he is a jerk, and the movie portrays him as a jerk. I don't think the movie says, oh, we should be like Neil Klugman, right? The movie doesn't approve of him 90% of the time, right? I mean, occasionally he does something that we might find a little bit endearing, his interaction with the little boy in the library, which, by the way, as I said, I think that's actually a really important thing. This is not just to establish something about Neil's character, right? When that little boy is looking in that book and saying, what does he say? That's the life, right? Isn't that the life, right? That's Neil at the country club, right? Neil's looking at right? The comparison between Neil's apartment in the Bronx, where he sits in the closet to talk on the phone, and the Potemkin's house, where they can't tell which phone is ringing.
Oh, yeah.
That's Neil's version of, wow, isn't that the life, right? So he wants that, and so when Alice is talking about him using her, she is his entree into a world that he does want, right? At the same time, as he says to her very clearly, I can't go all in either of these worlds, right? In the Bronx or in the suburbs, right? They both look so ridiculous to me, right? So I'm not sure if that's self-loathing, and again, maybe it is, but I'd say, Philip Roth took a lot of grief for being a self-hating Jew. When you read The Plot Against America, I mean, that's not the work of a self-hating Jew,
I'll have to agree with you there. I think he's
Right.
a misogynistic, self-hating Jew. They pulled his biography because, he had been Me Too'd at the end. I
Right.
love The Plot Against America, and I cannot stand him. And he gives me the shivers. And, she was I don't know if she was supposed to be younger, but he'd been in the army and he took advantage of her. And I had never seen it from beginning to end. And I wasn't a fan. Elaine.
You're not
Yeah.
supposed to be a fan of Neil. You're not supposed to be a fan of him, right?
Right. But I'm not a fan of Philip Roth. It's hard for me to, how do you separate the artist from what the artist is?
I know, it's a problem.
Yep.
It's a problem.
Elaine, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I feel like she was clearly in control, and she left her diaphragm at home because she never planned to see him again. This was a summer fling for her, and she was done. And he didn't get it. Another thing is, I saw symbolism of food in the movie. Not only the wedding scene, but the aunt is making dinner on a beastly hot night. They're standing there schwitzing, and she's cooking over the stove. Would any of us do that? I don't think so. And then she sneaks a peach in his suitcase when he goes to the girl's house.
Right.
There's just a lot of really weird things in there. But
Yeah.
those of us who went to college in the 60s, lived through some of this. I saw a figurine in the movie that was in my mother's house. And we had hair clips like the mother had when she was in bed. She had a hair clip in her hair. There's a lot of similarities of things we lived through.
You could write a whole paper on fruit in this movie, right? You know, cherries in his pocket. I mean, the refrigerator
yeah.
full of fruit.
Oh, yeah.
and stuff. You know, food is a big thing. The sitting at the dinner table, right, where everybody eats together, but they're not really talking to each other, right? They're just, you know, shouting to the maid to bring in more chicken. You know, I'm there. You know, there's something about the food and the connection and disconnection that it brings into life.
Yeah.
Hubie.
Okay, in terms of symbolism, this movie, there's two things I want. One, it's very interesting when you go back, because we all lived through this, but this is pre-computer, and it's very interesting, the phones, all this stuff that we really relate to. Okay, the other thing is,
Where is the suburban phone book? Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Or calling the country club to talk to someone. I mean, I remember when I first had kids, like, this is the restaurant I'm going to if there's an emergency. Like, they were going to go find me.
You're in the middle, sorry.
Yeah, Hubie, go ahead.
Okay, I think that's about it.
That's it? That's it? Okay.
Go ahead. Oh, wait, you're next.
I mean, all that stuff, it's really
Oh,
interesting.
there's one point, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There is one that, also it relates to how things have changed of significance. In other words, when he gives his son the $200 because he's got to get married, that he can live on $200 a week married, okay?
Yeah, right.
And now we have today the inflation. It's just the symbolism of showing the problems that you have to, it's a stretch maybe, but going forward saying there's a problem here.
Yeah.
That if they could have lived on 200 and 200 a day is poverty.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, you know, we often talk about inflation corrected dollars, right? So I'm not sure how much 200 a week then translates to now, but you know, clearly a good enough salary, but he's got to work his way up from there. They said that'll take till October.
Right. And he doesn't know how to load a truck. We have Maxine and then Susan.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay. I agree really with what everybody said. The rabbi, you said they created the bad view of the Jew. I don't think they created it. It just reinforced it. And something that Vanessa just said, when we were kids, my mother left a number to call in case we needed her. And lo and behold, my sister and I called the Algonquin Playhouse. We were in Maine every summer, and they went and got my mother because we were scared. So yeah, they left the number and they went and got her. So today that wouldn't happen, but you know.
So I do want to mention a little bit about the technique in the movie, because you know, hopefully some of you noticed it and recognized it, how often Neil appears in a reflection rather than as actually in mirrors, in swimming pools, in lakes, right? How often he appears hidden by something, behind bars almost, in what's that called? The balustrade of the staircase. You know, you see him through that, right? There's one of my favorites is this sort of weird, sort of spider webby thing that turns out to be the heads of people wearing kippot at the wedding scene, right? There are these weird sort of distortions of his image in particular, but hers also. That scene in the hotel near the end where they're both seen only in profile, back and forth, two profiles looking at each other, not so much in a two shot where you see the two of them together and there's a mirror in between. two profiles. So every time you see them, you see this face and a mirror, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that the director is making these choices, and he's describing for you how Neil is not a whole person. He's half a person.
Oh.
And maybe she is too, right? You know, and so they neither one of them are ready to be adults, frankly, to move beyond just sort of, you know, he wants what she has. She wants, if only to spite her mother, who he is, right? You know, those things are at play in the work of the camera and the decisions of the director throughout the movie. So so there's a lot of things in here that I think are very artful in a sense. And so I said, I mean, you know, this is not just a movie where Larry Pierce points the camera at people and shoots. There's a lot more to it than that. So I think it's actually very well directed. And as I said, if I'm going to side with anybody in this movie, it's gonna be Ben. He's not perfect, but you know, he's direct, he's decent, he's sentimental, he's unpretentious. You know, I mean, it has lines. Who knew from such a big wedding, you know, when we were young, you know, things like that come across to me as being very real. I think that for me, Jack Klugman steals the show in a lot of ways. I mean, it's a very real performance. You know, the scene where Neil actually talks to him and he says to him something, what does he say? You know, he tells him that, you know, they're talking about what you learn in school. Right. Says, let me see if I can find it.
Where the one where he says you have to be a ganef?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. You have to have you need a little, you can learn a lot you can learn from books. He says you need a little ganef in business.
A Yiddish cup.
But says, you know, you look at us like we're a bunch of freaks and you're something special. You know, as I said at the beginning, when I was your age, I felt exactly the same. Right? So this is a movie about the generation gap in some ways too, you know, which was a big deal in 1969. Right? Maybe it still is. You know, but, since my father and I used to fight about how long my hair was. You know. And now I wear my hair just like he did. So,
Susan, you had your hand up.
Yeah. So Rabbi, I was amused when you said your parents being appalled by the premarital sex.
Yeah.
Well, until the birth control pill came,
Yeah.
No nice Jewish girl ever had premarital sex. I mean, if they did, they hid it very, very well, because I mean, I have to say, my whole generation, we all got married so young. I mean, we went to college. Some were getting married their senior year in college. Dick and I got married right after we graduated. Why? For one reason and one reason only.
Yeah.
Don't tell my parents I told you this. They got married at winter break.
Yeah.
Of their senior year. What?
I mean, you just couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And I remember a few years later when when the birth control pill came out and everything changed. And my husband said to me, "Oh God, we really missed the boat."
Yeah, you know.
And then when you talk about a generation gap, yes, it still exists. I mean, when my grandchildren, when they hear that my husband and I did not sleep together until we were married, they look at me like I'm some kind of a freak.
Right.
And I mean, that's just I keep saying that's the way it was.
Yeah.
That's the way it was.
Like I said, I have not officiated a wedding, I think, in 35 years where the couple wasn't living together.
My grandchildren are all doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
So
and
it's,
then it's funny, my generation, I mean, we're laughing at these people who still go on a honeymoon. A
Yeah.
honeymoon used to be to get adjusted to one another.
right.
What do they have to adjust to? They've been living together for years.
By the way, do you know the origin of the term honeymoon? Does anyone know?
No.
It comes
No.
from mead. That when a couple got married, and of course, in medieval times, often these were arranged marriages, not Jewish marriage, all marriages were arranged marriages. The bride and groom didn't know each other at all. They were given a month's supply of mead, honey wine, right? For the first month, the first moon of the marriage. So the honeymoon is the allotment of mead that the couple received when they got married, you know. So.
Well, listen, the Orthodox, they are not living together, and they have Sheva Brachot, and those are, Sheva Brachot means 7 blessings, but they have these celebrations for 7 days. And when I was still in college, but I heard the young woman say, oh, thank God for the Sheva Brachot, because they've never, not only have they not been with their husband, they've never been with a man, I mean, with men. So it does still happen in that community.
And of course, at a very young age too.
Oh, yeah.
Years old, you know, right? So my Milwaukee cousins are on child number 9. The oldest one is 13, and they're not yet 40.
Wow.
Yeah.
I knew a couple in Aurora that had 13 children. And the oldest one was like the mother to the youngest one.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Sure.
So that gets us a little off of this.
Yes.
The movie.
I mean, if I would hope that when you think of this movie again, the first thing that comes to mind won't necessarily be the wedding scene. And I'd like it very much if it turned out to be the little boy in the library who's so amazed looking at art. And the thing, you know, the line from that is really about this movie. I think it's very important to think about it. It's, you know, isn't that the life, right? So what we want that we can't have, what we want that we think we shouldn't, what we can't go all in on, whatever it might be, right? I think it's an interesting film. So next week we'll look at Down and Out in Beverly Hills, directed by Paul Mazursky. It's based on a French film from, I think, the 1930s called Voodoo Saved from Drowning. So we may talk about that a little bit as we look at it as well. So,
Is that on Amazon Prime also?
I believe
Yes.
it is. Yes.
It is. There it is. It's $3.99 to rent, and it's from 1986.
Okay. Well, see you next week, everybody. It's nice to see you.
Thank you.
Friday night is Veterans Shabbat, and
Mhm.
Sunday is Jim Kenny, and it's virtual. He won't come in person anymore, and I think it'll be a really. Every Sunday's fascinating, but you're not going to want to miss this
Maybe
one.
the week after the election is pretty fascinating.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I said to my girlfriend, she goes, "Well, that's good timing." I said, "I know, I'm in charge of it." Anyway. Okay.
Bye,
Be well, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.